If you are ever camping deep in the backcountry and you hear a group of voices shouting a name into the dark, whatever you do not answer them. I made that mistake 2 summers ago. I thought I was helping a desperate search party find a lost hiker. I didn't realize until it was too late. They weren't looking for him. They had already found him. And by calling back out to them, I had just given away my exact location to a group of monsters. My name is Derek. I've been backcountry hiking for a little over 6 years, mostly doing solo trips through the dense, unforgiving stretches of the Pacific Northwest. When you spend that much time alone in the deep woods, you learn to trust your instincts. You learn that the forest has a specific rhythm, and when that rhythm breaks, something is wrong. I should have listened to that instinct 2 summers ago, because it almost cost me my life. It was late September, and I was on the 3rd day of a 5-day loop through a remote section of the Mount Hood National Forest. The area I chose was notorious for its lack of cell service and rugged, unmaintained trails. By 6:30 p.m., the sun was dipping below the heavy canopy of Douglas firs, plunging the woods into a thick, gray twilight. The temperature was dropping fast, so I found a small, flat clearing about 50 yards off the main trail to pitch my tent. I had just finished securing the rainfly and was about to strike my flint to start a small cooking fire when the silence of the woods shattered. "Marcus, Marcus, where are you?" The voice was distant, muffled by the dense trees, but it was clear, a man's voice. A few seconds later, another voice joined in from a different direction. "Marcus, call out if you can hear us." In the backcountry, hearing a search party usually triggers an immediate sense of urgency. My first thought was that a fellow hiker had gotten lost or injured, especially with the freezing night temperatures crawling in. Without thinking twice, I grabbed my headlamp, clicked it onto its brightest setting, and shouted back into the gloom. "Hey, I'm over here. Do you need help?" The distant shouting stopped instantly. For about 10 seconds, there was dead silence. No wind, no birds, just the heavy quiet of the woods. Then, I heard the sharp, frantic snapping of dry branches and brush. Several people were moving toward my position, and they were moving fast. 3 beams of light cut through the trees, bouncing erratically. Within a minute, 4 men stepped into my small clearing. I stood by my tent, expecting to see frantic family members or exhausted park rangers in neon vests. Instead, a strange wave of unease washed over me. The men were dressed in heavy, dark canvas jackets and mud-caked work boots. None of them had backpacks. No first aid kits, no water bottles, no emergency gear whatsoever. In fact, 2 of them weren't even carrying proper flashlights. They were using the cheap, plastic dollar store varieties that barely cut through the dark. The man in the front, a tall guy with a thick beard and a baseball cap pulled low, stepped into the center of my camp. He looked around aggressively, his eyes darting from my tent to my backpack and finally to me. He didn't look relieved to find another human being. He looked calculating. "You seen a guy pass through here?" the bearded man asked. His voice didn't have the panic or exhaustion of someone looking for a lost loved one. It was flat, cold. "No," I replied, adjusting my headlamp so it didn't shine directly in his eyes. "I've been in this clearing for about an hour. I haven't seen or heard anyone else on the trail since noon. Is Marcus a part of your group?" The bearded man paused for a fraction of a second, looking back at the other 3 men who had fanned out around the perimeter of my camp. One of them was leaning against a tree, idly tapping a heavy, iron mag light against the palm of his hand. "Yeah," the leader finally said, giving a tight, artificial nod. "He went ahead of us on the trail a few hours ago, got separated. We're trying to track him down before it gets completely pitch black. You're alone out here? That question hit me like a physical blow. There was no reason for a searcher to care if I was alone. My buddy is just down by the creek getting water, I lied smoothly, pointing randomly into the dark woods behind my tent. He should be back in a minute. I can grab my gear and help you guys look for Marcus if you want. The men didn't look toward the imaginary creek. The guy tapping the flashlight stopped. No need to wait for your buddy, the leader said, stepping closer to me. The trail splits about a quarter-mile up. If Marcus took the upper ridge, he's in trouble. Just walk with us to the fork. Show us exactly where you came from so we can rule out that path. Every logical fiber in my brain screamed at me to refuse, but I was outnumbered 4-1, deep in the wilderness. If I stayed in my camp and they meant harm, I was a sitting duck in an enclosed tent. I figured my best bet was to stay on my feet, keep my distance, and look for an opportunity to break away. All right, I said, grabbing my handheld flashlight from my pocket. Let's go take a look. We started walking back toward the main trail, but as we moved, the search dynamic felt completely wrong. Standard search parties walk abreast, calling out systematically, keeping a strict line to cover ground. These men didn't do that. They huddled in a loose, shifting formation around me. The leader walked a few paces ahead, while two of the men stayed directly behind my shoulders. I could hear their heavy breathing over the crunch of pine needles. Worse, they completely stopped calling out Marcus's name. The woods were dead silent, except for our footsteps. So Derek, right? The man to my left asked suddenly. I hadn't told them my name. My stomach plummeted. I realized he must have read the luggage tag on my backpack while I was turning around to grab my flashlight. Yeah, I muttered, keeping my eyes fixed on the trail ahead. You got a lot of high-end gear back there, he continued, his tone conversational but predatory. That tent looks expensive. Must be nice, being completely disconnected out here. No one knowing exactly where you are. I didn't answer. I kept my flashlight beam focused on the ground, my mind racing, desperately looking for an exit strategy. The trail was getting narrower, choked by dense thickets of blackberry brambles on either side. Then, we hit a rough patch where a massive fir tree had fallen across the path, forcing us to detour into the thick brush. The leader stepped over a decaying log first. I followed behind him. As I stepped over, the toe of my boot caught on something soft, hidden beneath a layer of ferns. I stumbled, losing my balance for a split second. To steady myself, I pointed my flashlight straight down at the ground to see what I had tripped over. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't a root. It was a high-end leather wallet, splayed open in the dirt. Beside it lay a broken pair of eyeglasses and a shattered smartphone. The flashlight beam illuminated the clear plastic window of the wallet's ID slot. The name on the driver's license was printed in clear, bold letters, Marcus Vance. The photo showed a smiling, clean-cut guy in his late 20s. But what made my blood freeze entirely was the condition of the wallet. The leather was torn, and the white plastic of the ID card was heavily smeared with a dark, sticky substance that I knew, with absolute certainty, was fresh, drying blood. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. They weren't looking for Marcus. They had already found him. They were shouting his name into the dark to lure out anyone else who might be camping in the area, to see if there were witnesses, or simply to find their next isolated target. And I had just told them exactly where my camp was. Everything all right back there, Derek? The leader's voice cut through the dark. He had stopped walking and was turning around to face me. The two men behind me closed the distance, their flashlights illuminating my back. They saw exactly what I was looking at. Yeah, I choked out. forcing my voice to sound completely normal despite the adrenaline flooding my system. I quickly kicked a pile of dead leaves over the wallet with the side of my boot. Just caught my foot on a root. I'm good. But I wasn't good. I looked up and saw the leader staring directly at my face. In the dim, ambient light of our flashlights, I could see his expression change. The faux helpful facade was entirely gone. He realized that I had seen it. He knew that I knew. He reached slowly into his canvas jacket pocket. In that exact microsecond, before his hand could come back out, I dropped my flashlight, turned on my heel, and sprinted with everything I had straight into the pitch-black woods. I didn't follow the trail. I bolted directly into the dense brambles and trees, tearing my face and hands against the thorns. Behind me, I heard heavy shouting and the crashing of bodies through the underbrush. Get him! Don't let him get to the ridge. I didn't look back. I clicked off my headlamp to hide my position, running entirely in the dark, guided only by the faint moonlight filtering through the canopy. I ran until my lungs burned like fire, navigating by pure survival instinct. I hid in a deep, hollowed-out log beneath a massive pile of brush, pressing my hand over my mouth to silence my frantic breathing. I stayed in that log for 9 agonizing hours, listening to the distant sound of their boots, crushing the leaves, searching for me until dawn. When the sun finally rose, I ran 3 miles straight to the nearest ranger station. The police later searched the area. They found my camp completely ransacked, my expensive gear stolen. A mile away, they found Marcus's body. I never hike alone anymore, and to this day, if I hear voices calling out a name in the woods, I don't answer. I just run. If you've ever spent a winter in the northernmost stretches of Minnesota, right up against the Canadian border, you know that the cold up there isn't just weather. It's a living, hostile entity. By late February, the snow packs down into a thick, concrete-like crust, and the local river systems turn into solid, ice-covered highways for snowmobiles. It's a beautiful place, but it's completely unforgiving. One mistake out in those woods can end your life before anyone even realizes you're missing. Back when I was 19, I was working part-time at a remote logging equipment yard, which meant I spent a lot of my nights commuting through the backcountry on a beaten-up 1993 Polaris Indy 440. It was a loud, temperamental machine that smelled permanently of burning 2-stroke oil, and the single headlight had a loose wire that caused the beam to flicker whenever I hit a rough patch of trail. But it was my only way to get around when the snow drifted over the unplowed rural roads. One Friday night, I stayed way too late at a bonfire party at a coworker's cabin deep in the woods. By the time I climbed onto my sled to head home, it was well past 2 in the morning. I hadn't had much to drink, just a single beer hours earlier, but I was exhausted. My eyes were heavy, and the biting air felt like needles pressing against the exposed skin between my helmet and my scarf. It was a perfectly cloudless night, dominated by a massive, radiant full moon. The moonlight was so intense that it cast stark, ink-black shadows behind every pine and spruce tree, illuminating the rolling white hills of the prairie landscape with an eerie, surreal blue glow. I didn't even really need my flickering headlight. The night sky made everything look as bright as a faded photograph. I accelerated onto the backwoods trail, a narrow path that I had ridden hundreds of times since I was a kid. It was a tight, winding route squeezed between dense walls of black spruce and shivering poplar trees. I knew every twist, every hidden rock, and every steep dip. About 3 miles down this path lay the Kettle River crossing. During any normal February, the ice on that specific bend of the river was easily 2 feet thick. Local trucks drove across it. I planned to maintain my speed, zip right across the ice, and be home in my warm bed in 20 minutes. The engine roared beneath me, a steady, vibrating whine that filled the silent night. I was leaning into the turns, carving through the fresh powder that had dusted the trail earlier that afternoon. The sense of isolation was absolute. There were no houses for miles, no cell towers, and no passing headlights. Just me, the machine, and the endless canopy of moonlit trees. I was approaching the final, straight stretch of trail that sloped down toward the riverbank. The poplar trees grew incredibly thick here, creating a natural tunnel that obscured the view of the water until you were right on top of it. I squeezed the throttle, preparing to carry my momentum up and over the riverbank. Then, the rhythm of the night shattered. Without a single sound of warning, a massive shape stepped out from the thicket of spruce trees on the right side of the trail. It didn't hesitate. It moved directly into the center of my narrow path and stood completely motionless, blocking my way entirely. My heart leaped into my throat. In the brilliant, silver glow of the moon, I was looking at the largest bull moose I had ever seen in my life. But it didn't look real. Its fur wasn't the dark, muddy brown of a typical animal. It was a striking, luminescent silver-white, shimmering under the moonlight like frosted glass. It stood easily 8 feet tall at the shoulders, its colossal, jagged antlers stretching out so wide they practically brushed the tree line on either side of the path. Panic flooded my system. At the speed I was going, hitting an animal that size would be like slamming into a brick wall. I would be thrown from the sled, my neck broken instantly. I violently grabbed the brake lever, squeezing it against the handlebar with all the strength I had. The track of the Polaris locked up instantly. The back end of the heavy snowmobile fishtailed wildly to the left, kicking up a massive roster-tail cloud of white powder that completely blinded me for a second. The machine skidded sideways down the icy path, engine screaming as I fought to keep it from flipping over. I braced for the impact, throwing my weight to the side, waiting for the devastating crunch of metal against bone. The sled finally ground to a halting, shuddering stop. The engine sputtered, dropping down to a low, rough idle. For a long moment, the only sound was my own frantic, ragged breathing inside my helmet. My hands were shaking so violently against the handlebars that I could barely keep my fingers wrapped around the grips. A massive wave of adrenaline had kicked my exhaustion entirely out of my system. I sat there, waiting for the cloud of kicked-up snow to settle. As the air cleared, I looked straight ahead, expecting to see the towering silver beast staring back down at me, or at least running off into the dense woods. There was nothing. The trail ahead of me was completely empty. I blinked hard, rubbing the visor of my helmet, thinking that my tired eyes were playing cruel tricks on me. I unclipped my visor, letting the sub-zero air hit my face to shock myself awake. I stared intensely into the thick brush where the animal had emerged, and then toward the opposite side of the trail where it should have run. The woods were dead silent. Not a single branch was swaying. Not a single clump of snow had been knocked from the low-hanging evergreen boughs. A profound sense of confusion washed over me. I turned the snowmobile slightly, forcing the flickering headlight to sweep across the exact spot where the silver moose had been standing just seconds prior. The snow was pristine. It was a smooth, unbroken sheet of white powder. There were no deep hoof prints. There were no dragged tracks. There was absolutely no evidence that a 1,200-pound animal had just stepped onto the trail. I sat back on the seat, a cold sweat breaking out across my forehead despite the freezing temperatures. I began to rationalize it. I was 19, I was exhausted, and I had been staring at the hypnotic, moonlit snow for too long. I figured my brain had simply suffered a terrifying trick of the light, synthesizing a phantom obstacle out of the shifting shadows of the trees. I let out a shaky, nervous laugh, feeling a bit foolish. I pumped the throttle a couple of times, letting the engine warm back up, and began to crawl slowly forward, intending to finish my ride home and put this weird night behind me. I rolled the snowmobile past the spot where the creature had vanished, moving at a cautious walking pace. The trail dipped sharply downward, clearing the final cluster of poplar trees, and the wide expanse of the river opened up before me. I gripped the handlebars, and my mind went entirely blank with pure shock. Directly in front of me, stretching from one riverbank to the other, the ice was completely gone. Instead of the thick, solid white highway I had crossed just 2 days prior, there was a yawning, jagged black void. A massive stretch of the river had opened up, exposing a rushing, turbulent torrent of freezing, dark water, swirling with dangerous chunks of broken ice. A sudden midwinter current shift, or an underground thermal pocket, had completely eroded the ice from beneath, leaving a lethal trap hidden just past the bend in the trees. If that phantom silver moose hadn't blocked my path, I wouldn't have tapped the brakes. I would have accelerated down that slope, completely unaware of the danger, until it was too late. At that speed, on a heavy, older sled like mine, I would have flown off the bank and plunged directly into the middle of the roaring, pitch-black rapids. At -25 degrees, miles away from civilization, with no cell service and no one looking for me, I wouldn't have survived for more than 4 minutes. The heavy winter gear I was wearing would have filled with water, dragging me straight to the bottom of the river, beneath the remaining shelf of ice. I would have vanished without a trace, and nobody would have found my body until the spring thaw. I shut off the snowmobile's engine. The sudden silence of the wilderness felt heavy, almost suffocating. I climbed off the machine, walked back up the slope to the exact spot where I had skidded, and looked once more at the empty trail. There were still no tracks, no signs of life, just my own deep ski ruts stopping a mere 3 feet away from the edge of the open water. I didn't sleep at all that night. To this day, I can't explain what I saw out there in the woods. Part of me wants to believe it was just a highly vivid, perfectly timed hallucination born from pure exhaustion. But deep down, in the quietest parts of my mind, I know better. Something stepped out of the shadows of the Blackwood Pines that night. Something that knew exactly what was waiting for me around that bend. For most of my life, I was the guy who only went camping if it involved a fully equipped camper van or a cabin with electricity. But 2 summers ago, after a particularly stressful year at my corporate job, I decided I needed a clean break from society. I wanted to prove to myself that I could handle the wilderness completely unassisted. I bought a high-end backcountry setup, packed a heavy rucksack, and drove out to a highly isolated, unmanaged forestry zone in the deep woods of northern Maine. The first day was honestly incredible. I hiked about 4 miles off the main logging road, navigating by a physical topographical map, until I found a perfect, untouched clearing near a small, unnamed tributary stream. The air was crisp, smelling heavily of damp earth and pine needles. I spent the afternoon doing exactly what I had envisioned. I caught 2 small brook trout, gutted them by the water, and cooked them over a small, efficient camp stove. Afterward, I sat on a mossy log and read a paperback novel until the fading sunlight made the words run together on the page. I felt an immense sense of accomplishment. The crushing weight of my daily anxiety had completely evaporated, replaced by the serene, rhythmic sounds of the forest. For my sleeping arrangement, I had opted out of a traditional ground tent. Instead, I brought a specialized asymmetric camping hammock designed for deep wilderness backpacking. It was made of ultra-lightweight, high-tensile nylon, suspended between two massive, ancient white pine trees about 15 feet apart. The hammock featured a heavy-duty built-in mesh bug net that zipped completely around the top, creating a fully enclosed, floating fabric cocoon. Because the meteorology report had guaranteed an absolutely flawless, cloudless night, with 0% chance of rain, I made the conscious decision to leave the heavy rainfly tarp packed away in my rucksack. I wanted to lie back and look through the mesh at the vast, unobstructed canopy of stars. By 10 p.m., the temperature had dropped significantly, and the woods had plunged into a deep, velvety darkness. I climbed into the hammock, zipped the bug net tight, and slipped into my heavy winter sleeping bag. If you've never slept in a camping hammock, the experience is incredibly unique. You are suspended about 3 feet off the forest floor, gently rocking with the wind. But it also leaves you completely vulnerable, in a way a ground tent doesn't. From the outside, your body weight pulls the thin nylon fabric taut, creating a perfect, distinct silhouette of your entire body to anyone standing in the woods. You are a floating target, completely visible from every single angle, underneath and around you. Despite that passing thought, the gentle swaying of the trees quickly lulled me to sleep. I passed out into a deep, dreamless slumber, feeling entirely safe in my isolated paradise. I woke up hours later. The shift in my consciousness wasn't gradual, it was sudden, like a wire had been snapped in my brain. I didn't open my eyes immediately. Instead, I lay there, listening. The first thing I noticed was the temperature. The air had turned bitterly cold, the kind of damp, sub-zero chill that seeps right into your bones. The second thing I noticed was the silence. The gentle nighttime symphony of crickets, frogs, and rustling leaves had completely ceased. The forest was vacuum-sealed in an oppressive, unnatural quiet. I blinked my eyes open, staring up through the black mesh of the bug net. The moon had shifted, casting long, skeletal shadows across the clearing. I checked the illuminated face of my wristwatch. It was 3:42 a.m. I was about to close my eyes and try to adjust my sleeping position when I felt a subtle, rhythmic vibration travel up the suspension straps of the hammock. It was a tiny, localized movement, causing the fabric to sway ever so slightly. It wasn't the wind. The air was dead calm. It felt exactly as if something had lightly brushed against the tree trunk behind my head. My chest tightened, and my breath hitched in my throat. I went completely stone still, my muscles locking into place as a cold wave of adrenaline flooded my system. I held my breath, straining my ears to catch any sound of a bear or a deer foraging in the brush around my camp. Then, the true horror of my situation materialized. Through the thin, single layer of parachute nylon directly beneath my lower back, I felt a distinct, solid physical pressure. It wasn't a branch drifting in the breeze. It was a broad, heavy, unmistakable pressure pressing upward against my spine. My mind went completely blank with pure shock as I realized the terrifying geometric reality of what was happening. Someone or something was standing directly underneath my suspended hammock in the pitch dark. I lay perfectly rigid, my eyes wide with terror, staring helplessly at the mesh ceiling. The pressure beneath me shifted. It wasn't static. I felt the slow, agonizingly deliberate sensation of 5 distinct points of pressure tracing a path across the fabric. It was a human hand. The fingers were slowly, methodically sliding along the contour of my shoulder blades, feeling the shape of my body through the thin material, checking to see where my torso ended and my legs began. The absolute vulnerability of being trapped inside a zipped fabric cocoon pinned me in place. I couldn't quickly sit up. I couldn't reach for the small hunting knife tucked inside my rucksack on the ground below. Every single micro movement I made would cause the loud nylon fabric to rustle and shift, alerting the predator right beneath me that I was awake. For 2 agonizing minutes, the hand continued its slow, predatory examination. I could feel the faint, radiant warmth of another living body heat transferring through the thin nylon against my back. And then, the silence was broken by a sound that made my stomach completely turn over. Right beneath the fabric, where my left ear was resting, I heard the faint, wet, rhythmic sound of heavy nasal breathing. It was accompanied by a low, gravelly, human clicking sound, like someone idly snapping their teeth together in contemplation. They were so close that only a fraction of a millimeter of synthetic fabric separated my skin from whatever face was pressed upward against the bottom of my bed. "Ethan." The voice was a dry, raspy, barely audible whisper that vibrated right through the nylon and into my skull. It didn't sound like a monster. It sounded like an unstable, deeply unhinged man who had been watching me from the shadows of the tree line all afternoon. The sheer terror of hearing my own name spoken by an anonymous intruder in the middle of a blank map broke my paralysis. The survival instinct took over completely. I didn't care about making noise anymore. With a frantic, explosive surge of energy, I threw my weight to the right, thrashing violently inside the sleeping bag. The sudden, chaotic movement caused the hammock to swing wildly back and forth like a pendulum. At the exact same moment, my hand shot upward, desperately fumbling in the dark for the metal zipper tab of the bug net. I found the tab and ripped it backward with a loud, metallic shwirt sound. I didn't even bother trying to climb out gracefully. I tumbled sideways, straight out of the open mesh, tearing my sleeping bag, falling 3 feet through the air and landing hard on my shoulder on the rocky, uneven dirt below. The impact knocked the wind out of my lungs, but the adrenaline overrode the pain. I scrambled onto my hands and knees, whipped my tactical flashlight out of my jacket pocket, and clicked the high-intensity beam onto its brightest, blinding setting. I spun around, sweeping the piercing white light directly underneath the swinging hammock, expecting to face a violent struggle. The space beneath the trees was completely empty. The beam of light cut through the dark clearing, illuminating the trunks of the white pines, my rucksack, and the dense brush. There was no one there. Shaking so violently I could barely hold the flashlight straight, I crept forward, keeping the beam locked onto the ground beneath the still swaying nylon fabric. As the light hit the dirt directly under the center point of the hammock, my throat went completely dry. The thick layer of damp, brown pine needles that covered the forest floor had been entirely cleared away in a neat, rectangular shape. Someone had spent hours lying flat on their back in the freezing dirt directly beneath me, staring upward at my silhouette through the night. And right there, pressed deeply into the soft, exposed black mud, was a pair of heavy, distinct boot prints, oriented perfectly parallel to where my back had been resting. I didn't pack up my camp. I didn't grab my expensive rucksack or my cooking gear. I grabbed my car keys, kept my flashlight pointed dead ahead, and sprinted the 4 miles back to the logging road in a state of absolute, blind panic. I reached my SUV just as the first gray light of dawn was breaking over the horizon. I drove straight to the state police barracks, but when the rangers went out to investigate the site later that afternoon, all they found was my abandoned, sliced-open hammock swaying gently in the wind. The occupant of the boots had vanished completely into the vast, trackingless wilderness. I still go camping sometimes, but I will never, under any circumstances, sleep in a hammock again. Because every time the wind blows and a fabric rustles, I can still feel that slow, heavy hand tracing the line of my spine in the dark.